Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 331 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is Jackson. Glad to have you with us. I'll be joined by Megan in just a few minutes to talk about what's been happening in the bar exam world. And actually, after we finished recording this week's episode, there was some late breaking information. So I'm going to share that with you in just a moment. But we've got some new information coming out of New York that I think is going to be fairly significant. In any event, we are glad to have you with us today. If this is your first time on the podcast, welcome. We provide these podcasts in both audio and video formats. If you'd like to watch today's episode, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/331. That's the episode number, and find all of the information you need there. If you prefer to listen to your podcast, you can do that. We are syndicated on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, and now Amazon Podcasts as well. So make sure you subscribe and check it out on any of those platforms. There's been a lot going on in the bar exam, obviously, in 2020. We've continued to update and keep our listeners aware of what's been happening. And of course, now results are also starting to come back from the tests that were given in July and now early September. So we want to bring you up to date on that information as well. But we also want to let you know that if you are taking or planning to take the bar exam in 2021, we have a free special training webinar that we don't want you to miss out on. The title of this webinar is Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam, Why You Should Ignore the Crowds and the Fear. It's a look at the strategy that we found to be extremely effective in 2020 in preparing students to take the bar exam in this pandemic world. And we want to share it with you. It takes about an hour to get through the material, and then we conclude with a live Q&A in which you can ask your questions about your particular circumstance or jurisdiction, and I'll be answering those live for you on the Q&A. We're providing these webinars weekly on Saturday evenings, and all you have to do to register is just click on the button. If you're watching the video, it's right down at the bottom of your screen. If you're in the audio version of today's podcast, you'll see a link. You can click there, or for more details, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/now and get everything that you need and get registered. And then we'll see you Saturday, 5 p.m. Eastern. That would be 2 p.m. Pacific time for this special free training webinar. Now is the best time to take the bar exam. All right, I want to let you know about some late breaking information that happened, of course, just after we finished recording this week's episode. We got an update late last night that New York State announced that they would be giving the bar exam in February 2021 in an online format. That's huge news. We had anticipated it given the information coming from California and from the NCBE that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But the fact that New York is now the second major jurisdiction to say that they'll give the bar exam online seems to indicate that the test is going to go to an online format, at least in major metropolitan jurisdictions. And so this is something I think to be aware of and something to be prepared for. We'll talk about it in the webinar. Now is the best time to take the bar exam in more detail, but wanted to let you know that. Now, the big question in New York, the one that is still unresolved, is who's going to be eligible to take the exam. New York announced only that they would say at a later date what their eligibility requirements would be. This is a fairly significant piece of information because you may have heard that New York restricted pretty significantly who could sit for the exam. That was an interesting decision to make, considering it was an online exam in October of 2020, and therefore the numbers of people taking the exam shouldn't have made any difference. We suspected then, and I still think today, that New York is moving to a restrictive model in terms of who will be allowed to sit for the exam. And so for people who are repeat bar takers, at least those who have taken the exam 2 times or more in New York, it looks like you may not have an opportunity to take the test there anymore. And certainly will have some implications for foreign trained attorneys. So we're going to keep an eye out on this. We'll watch to see what New York announces whenever that announcement is made. But the big news is that they've gone online. The second piece of interesting news is that we did get results from a couple of other jurisdictions middle of this week. Now, the early results that came back from the July in-person bar exams were uniformly positive. People reported better scores, and the states reported higher pass rates, in some cases by 10% or more. Now that trend has suddenly come to a screeching halt. Washington State gave their exam on September 9th and 10th. This was an in-person exam. Their September 9th and 10th in-person exam, the pass rate was 37.8%. That is just horrible. Last year, their pass rate for the overall exam was 85.9%. So a stunning almost 50% drop. And that is really, truly significant. Now, there are very few people that took the exam in Washington State because they had already given a diploma waiver to a wide range of people. So I think they were working with a disproportionately skewed number of bar takers. Nonetheless, a 37% pass rate is incredibly low for a July exam, and it's going to bear some more investigation, but that's the early news there. Then the third piece of early news, which is not yet confirmed, but what we're hearing is that the state of Idaho administered the bar exam online on October 5th and 6th. Now, up to this point, we've not gotten any October 5th and 6th results officially released, but Idaho indicated that they had 28 people take the exam, but only 8 pass. So that's a pass rate of 28.6%. Now, those numbers are too small to make any statistical analysis. However, when you've only got 28 people taking the exam, that sample size is too small to make any relevant statistical implications from it. But what is important to me is that the rumor is that Idaho did not scale the 100 questions of the multi-states. Now, that is significant because if they didn't, that would account for a much lower pass rate. We do know at this point that Georgia had announced that they would scale the 100 questions in their jurisdiction, and most states have not indicated what they were going to do one way or the other. I'm suspecting that some of the smaller states simply don't have the capacity and don't have the resources to do the kind of scaling that was needed. It's a psychometric study that's required, and it would have required a great deal of cooperation between states. And for smaller states like Idaho, they may not have had anyone else that they could go to help them do that psychometric scaling for their 28 students. In addition, I'm not sure how you do it on such a small sample size. So as a result, if they just took a raw number that each applicant got correct, that's going to create a significant depression in those scores, because typically you would look at something like a 7 to 10 point bump for every 100 questions. So given the lack of that bump or scaling, then you would have a lower score there, and that would translate to a lower overall pass rate. So that may be part of the reason for this lower pass rate. Again, that's all unofficial. We don't know the statistics officially yet in Idaho. It's the first of the October 5th and 6th exam jurisdictions to give any kind of results out. So we're going to keep a close eye on this in the upcoming weeks. What does that mean if you took the exam on October 5th and 6th? It means that if your jurisdiction gave those 100 multiple choice questions and they didn't scale them, it probably puts you at a disadvantage. So it's a lot of interesting information there, and we're going to keep an eye on it and see what happens. But it was by no means the only information that came out this week. We had a bombshell announcement from the National Conference of Bar Examiners, and so we want to get into that. And we also want to talk a little bit about the Florida bar exam and some of the things that happened there in their October 13th online exam. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into our conversation as we recap the week in the breaking news from the NCBE that occurred just in the last 24 or 48 hours. So why don't you bring us all up to date?
Yeah, so this is related to, if you watched or listened to us talk a few days ago about California and how they made the decision to move online. The NCBE has announced that they will offer a full-length exam available for the February exam online. So they will have an in-person exam and an online exam running concurrently, and it will be up to jurisdictions to determine which, just one or the other, that they would like to use for the February exam. So same dates, but there will be a 200 question MBE that will be scored, and all of the sort of problems we had with how do we grade a 100 question MBE. Thankfully, that becomes moot for this one. It will have the performance test and the normal UBE MEEs. So good news, I think.
Well, yeah, I think it is good news. There's a lot to unpack here. I think one place to start, you remember last week, California announced right after the bar exam that they were going to give an online exam in February 2021. Which you and I remarked was interesting because the NCBE hadn't bought into that yet. I have the feeling that the national conference really had their hand played and forced by California saying they were going to go to an online exam. Did it feel that way to you?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I know that the NCBE had said that they were in talks with jurisdictions about doing an online exam in February. And then before anyone could remark on where those talks were going, California just went ahead and said, hey, this is what we're doing. Now, California has the largest bar exam of any state in the country by far, and they also give their own essays and performance tests. So the only thing that California depends on the NCBE for is traditionally the MBE questions. So I think California was just in such a good spot of being able to say, we don't really need you. Like we want to use the NCBE's MBE questions. This is definitely preferable for them, but they certainly had the best hand to sort of force the NCBE to give an online option. So I think if that's what happened, good for California, because I think the rest of the states now get to benefit from the NCBE making the decision that they will give the full exam as an online option.
Yeah, and it's really something of a dramatic turnaround, because the NCBE certainly refused to do this going into the July, September, October exams, and then sort of put on the beginnings of a full court public relations press to talk about what a great job the online exams have been. And it put them in that awkward position. I think you pointed this out. On the one hand, you're saying it went really well in those exams. On the other hand, you're saying, well, we don't want to do it anymore. And I thought that was an untenable position for the national conference. California then sort of forces their hand by saying, we're going to go online whether you're with us or not. And now the NCBE has that feeling of, wait for me, I'm your leader. Let me run to the front of the pack again. Because the loss in a typical year in California, you might have 20,000 plus bar takers. That's a big royalty payment going away for the NCBE. And so they jumped in and said, okay, so we're going to do that. Well, now, what does that mean for other jurisdictions? And you touched on this. The national conference isn't saying we absolutely will only give an online exam. They're saying we will do both, but they will do it only on those dates. So for their purposes, the multi-state is the last Wednesday of February. The uniform bar exam is the day before, the last Tuesday in February. And those jurisdictions would also presumably have a choice about giving the exam in person or online. I suppose it's possible that a jurisdiction could offer their applicants a choice on those dates, but I don't think we're going to see multiple dates. Do you?
No, and the NCBE was very clear with this is the traditional, the normal scheduled date. There will be an online test on those 2 days and an in-person test on those 2 days. So we are not anticipating, should not turn into what this last bar exam season turned into, of these multiple dates getting pushed back and multiple different bar examinations throughout the year. I am really appreciative, as someone who works in this field, that what this does is allow it to be everyone in the country who is taking the bar exam in the winter is taking it on the same days, with a slight variation that exists every year with some of those outlier states. But for the most part, those same days. And we're not going to see what we saw in July, moving into September, multiple dates in September, then October, and ending up with multiple dates in October. That will not be the case here. This will be the regular February 2 days, with the exception, Jackson, I know we talked about, if you want to talk about this, the question mark still with some of these jurisdictions that don't give the UBE. Is it possible, and we're seeing some in the chat box as well with Florida, what's going to happen? Is Florida going to go back to the 2 day? Can California get everything done in 2 days with the full 200 question MBE online? So any thoughts on those?
Yeah, let's separate those out. First of all, let's talk about California's test. California gives 5 one-hour essays and a 90-minute performance test and the 200 question MBE. Now, the MBE takes up a full day, 200 questions, even if you break it into the same pattern they used in the online exams this fall of 50 questions in 90 minutes, break, 50 questions in 90 minutes. So that's a full 6-hour testing day for 1 day on Wednesday. Now the question is, can a jurisdiction give the rest of their exam in a single day? Well, if you're a UBE jurisdiction and you're doing 6 30-minute essays and 2 90-minute performance tests, it's a long day, but I think it's doable. But California at 5 essays and a performance test seems like an extremely long day to me. If you think about the way they've given the test online, it's not just an hour per question. There's a startup period, there's a setup, there's a upload, there's the verification through the AI, there's all of those things. I think that what would be typically 6 hours in person for the California day one could easily expand into 10 hours by the time you've done your breaks and everything else. And I wouldn't be surprised if California bookended the NCBE with a day on Tuesday and a day on Thursday, the way they used to do it, right? When you took the exam, it was a 3-day test. And it wouldn't surprise me if they went back to a 3-day test. Had Texas remained in their prior formula, they would have had to be in a 3-day test, I think. Georgia has got 4 essays, and they cut their essay time down to 30 minutes. I don't know if they'll stay at 30 minutes now, or if they'll go back to 45. 4 45-minute essays and 2 90-minute performance tests is still a pretty long day. So I think that you're sort of moving at the outer edges. Now, let's talk about Florida's day one. Has nothing to do with the NCBE. It's 3 1-hour essays and 3 hours of multiple choice testing. I think Florida could do that day online pretty successfully. They certainly showed they could do the full test in a single day in October. So I would not expect any change in that respect. Would Florida go online or in person? I don't know. I would think from a COVID standpoint, it would be better to go online. It would certainly be more convenient. There's a lot of advantages, but I think that it's hard to separate, in my mind, the politics of COVID from the reality of the bar exam. In other words, I think the pressure on a lot of these states on their bar administrators is going to come from the governors and the judiciary of that state. And that may be driven more by politics than by reality. So I think it's possible that you could end up with an online or an in-person exam in virtually any jurisdiction except California right now, which is the only one that's definitively said we're going to go online. I feel like New York would go online. Seems more likely in their circumstance. I think any of the states that have been more proactive about COVID would tend to be online. So Massachusetts, Washington State, some other states that I think are pretty proactive. But then I think about states like Georgia and Florida, Texas, where I'm just not sure. I think the politics are going to really push hard to say, go give an in-person exam because we're going to pretend COVID doesn't exist. And I know we try not to get too political here, but I don't know that you can separate those out right now. So I think if you're in any of those jurisdictions, you should be preparing for an online test because that's different, right? But recognize that it could turn out to be an in-person exam. And then you've got to decide from a health standpoint if you're willing to do it that way. What I don't necessarily think is going to happen is that any jurisdiction would say we're going to offer both options without something like accommodations or disability. In other words, I don't think Florida would say we're going to give it both ways and you get to just choose.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so you don't think that that jurisdictions might try to thread the needle by allowing people to pick one or the other?
Administratively, it's pretty challenging, right? You've got to still do all the things to set up for an in-person exam, which takes a huge amount of resources. And then if you're going to go online, that's a whole nother set of resources. I don't know. Bar examiners tend to be change avoidant. We saw that in 2020. Maybe they'll be really progressive and they'll say, sure, you will do it both ways and on the same days. I thought it was challenging enough that they did it 2 different ways in a lot of jurisdictions, but they always had different dates. And I think that's a question of resources. So we'll see how that plays out. But that's my sense right now in the early days of this.
Yeah, so we'll keep people updated. Keep an eye on your jurisdiction. I know Sylvia asked in the chat if there's a deadline for the states to decide. No, the NCBE just put it out here as here are the materials. The NCBE doesn't make decisions about the actual administration of it beyond licensing the certain materials for certain days and times. So they've done that. And now it's going to be up to your state to decide what they want to do with it. So keep an eye on that. Presumably, if you are already registered for the February bar, you should receive emails from your state, but make sure you stay on top of it because as we saw with the last administration of the bar exam, things got real crazy. So hopefully they will be a lot tamer this time, but know that things are liable to change. Just because something has been said by your state bar on one day doesn't mean it's going to hold true in another month. So yeah.
Yeah, and I suspect a lot of bar exam administrators were caught off guard by these announcements this week. We didn't see that coming. We didn't get any wind of it coming. And I'm guessing a lot of bar administrators were like, huh, what? What? You said you weren't going to do an online exam. Now you're going to do one? Okay. So it really does make you wonder, though, all that agita in 2020 about, oh, we can't do it online, it's not safe, it doesn't work. And then, oh yeah, we're going to do one. And yet at the same time, some of the surveys coming back from takers in 2020 indicate lots of problems with the online exam. So now we've flipped positions, right? And I want to say one other thing about that, because the survey thing is turning out to be a big deal, particularly in New York, where a couple of New York legislators sent out a survey to the October 2020 New York bar takers saying, what'd you think about the online exam? And this is a couple of legislators that were advocating for diploma privilege. And the vast majority, 75% of the people, did not like the online exam. Now, I thought that was really interesting because that is almost the flip of what we've seen among our students. And I think the difference is that our students were prepared and thinking in terms of an online exam. It wasn't quite a shock to them, as much of a shock. And they're not, for the most part, our students are not first-time 3Ls who were generally, I think, feeling victimized by the whole process and may have been more angry and wanted diploma privilege anyway. But I do think it's an interesting piece that suddenly there's this pushback about how awful the exams were that we're hearing that we didn't get coming off those 2 days of exams. And then the day in Florida, we did not get feedback from our students saying that administratively, technically, logistically, that for the most part, there were a lot of problems. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a big difference with retakers versus the 3Ls, recent grads who are taking the exam the first time and just were feeling a lot more like this is just unfair. So, and wanted the diploma privilege, which has never really been an option for people who are retakers anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So I thought this was a good question from a student, and it's about which option, assuming that either they're in a jurisdiction where they're given the option to take it online or in person, or if you're in UBE, this is going to be interesting. If you're in a UBE jurisdiction and you want to take it online, you could take it in, presumably, as far as we know right now, you could take it in a UBE jurisdiction that gives it online and you could waive in, or you could take it, if you want to take it in person, you could choose that. So this student said, which option should I select? The online version would be a no-brainer, but software reliability issues, exam time management issues, MPT challenges, and regulations are all factors to consider.
Yeah, they really are. And I don't know that there's one size fits all answer. I would say if I were trying to become a member of the Texas bar or the New York bar, which are both UBE jurisdictions, but I really didn't want to go through the hassle of being in those states to take it. And I saw that there was a really convenient UBE online in the District of Columbia or in New Mexico or somewhere else, Colorado, any other state. It would be really tempting to do it online from the comfort of my home and then just wave that score in. It's score portability. So from that standpoint, I think it's an advantage to do the online exam. It's just easier that way. We did not get much feedback, again, I'll say from our students, that there were tech breakdowns. You and I didn't hear very much where people said I couldn't get on or I couldn't upload my answers. There were some frustrations, but by and large, and we had a lot of people in California, a lot of people in Florida, we had UBE jurisdictions around the country. We just didn't get that feedback. So I feel reasonably confident that if they could have handled the stress of the October exams, they can handle the stress technically and logistically from the bar examiner side. Now, is it harder to do a bar exam online? I would say it is harder, definitely harder to do a performance test. No question about that. But if everybody's doing the test online in a jurisdiction, I think there may be some equating of the scores, some leveling of the scores because of that. I don't know that essay writing is necessarily harder. I didn't think that was harder. And I didn't think multiple choice was harder. So I think that it might come down to performance tests and it might come down to how comfortable you are. But I also think that if you're practicing, and we've given you a pretty good methodology to work through them, we had a lot of students that told us in feedback, I did what you told us to do, and I felt okay with my performance tests. And I would say, as much as anything, it was a matter of practice and having enough time to practice. So if I were choosing for myself, I would choose the online exam. That's just me. I don't think there's any dishonor in taking the in-person exam. On the other hand, if you're in a high-risk health category, please don't do that. The bar exam isn't worth it. And this is just my gratuitous comment, but the scientists seem to be pretty clear that sitting in closed rooms with a lot of other people is not a bright idea. And I just don't think you should put yourself through that unless you really feel like that's the only way you can get through the test and you are confident enough in your health. So that's where I come out. What's your thought about it?
Yeah, I think it's really personal. So I think it's one of those things that if it comes down to you're in a position to be able to choose, like as of right now in California, there's no choice. You're either taking it online or you have an accommodation. Those are the people that are going to allow to take it in person. And so otherwise you're going to be online. But if you're in a place where you can choose, you got to just make the decision for yourself. There's no perfect decision. I think that's definitely true. Pick what you feel the most comfortable with, what you can live with, what you feel like would be the best decision for yourself. And then accept it and prep for it and move forward with it. Don't equivocate for months. You just don't have the time to do that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk now a little bit about Florida. So the Florida bar exam happened, feels like light years ago, but it wasn't last week.
8 days ago.
And there was a surprise on the multiple choice questions. So they did Florida multiple choice and tested a topic that, Jackson, when was the last time Florida multiple choice questions dealt with trusts?
Well, in my extended dinosaur memory, never. Trusts have always been an essay topic in Florida. Florida doesn't require a subject to be in essay or multiple choice. The only required subject is Florida civil and criminal procedure, which by tradition has always been given as multiple choice, and it was given in multiple choice on this exam as well. But trusts have been historically given as essays, and wills have historically been given as multiple choice. There was a time 20 plus years ago when there were a few wills essay questions, but it's been that long since it switched. What's really interesting about this edition of Florida Trust is that it wasn't just a small smattering of questions. It looks like it might have been anywhere from 20 to 30 questions. So it was a huge part of the exam. And overall, I think there were 6 or 7 subjects tested in the Florida multiple choice, which is not done. Typically, there are only 3 subjects tested. So the combination of these, the number of subjects and the unusual addition of a subject, I think throws multiple choice scoring up in the air. And I have to get a little geeky about this for a minute. I know we got some questions about what do we think would happen with scoring and scaling. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper dive here. Historically, what Florida has done is to take 3 topics for multiple choice and essentially say you get 0 to 33 points on each of those. And then they take your score in each category and they figure out where you stand relative to the mean. In other words, what's the average number of questions that somebody got right in that topic area? And then they look at standard deviations to equate it to a multi-state score. Then they do the same thing in the 3 essays that they give. And so they've got 6 Florida categories or day 1 categories. Well, with this exam, the way they gave it this year, of course, there was no multi-state at all. So there was nothing to equate to there. But now you can't create a set of data points. I think some of these subjects, it sounds like maybe had 5 or 6 questions in them, like multi-state torts. There may have been 5 or 6 questions. It's not enough to create data points. So you can't equate each of these now 6 or 7 categories of Florida multiple choice. So what I think that means is that your Florida multiple choice will be literally just your raw score. How many questions did you get right out of 100? Now, on Florida multiple choice, for the most part, we've always said if you got about half of them right, you were doing pretty well because of the equating factor. I don't think there's going to be an equating factor on this exam. So I think, let's say you get 50 questions correct, and then we equate the 3 essays, and somehow that has to be converted into a 200-point scale, and you need 136 to pass. Well, you only get 50 scale points out of that multiple choice piece. You got to get 86 scale points from the 3 essays, which would be a fairly substantial task. All of which is to say, I expect we will see a horrifically low pass rate in Florida. I think it's going to be bad. And I'm hopeful that I'm wrong. I'm hopeful that our students did well and that students around the country did well. But I think this was a shock. I don't know anywhere, and I know you follow this nationally, no one was looking for trust as a Florida multiple choice question. And so given that, I think it was a surprise to everyone. And while typically we would say, well, that's not a big deal because it would equate out of those 30 questions, maybe most people got 10 right. Well, here there's nothing to equate it to. So if you only got 10 right, you only got 10 points. And that makes me very nervous about this exam. Therefore, our guidance to students is this. If you took the October 13th, 2020 Florida bar exam, unless you feel really good about your performance, we think you should resume your studies now in anticipation of the February 2021 exam. If you're in our course, you have access to your materials without interruption. And when the results come out on November 20th, you need to be ready to jump in full blast. But I would think right now you should be doing some studying. I think to wait until November 20th, having not done anything, and then try to go from 0 to 100 right away is going to be very challenging, particularly given the tenor of the season, the health issues, everything else that's going on. And I think a lot of applicants from October may very well just say, forget it and skip February 2021. I don't think that's a good strategy. I think February 2021 is actually going to be a pretty good test for people in Florida. So I would like to see, if you didn't pass, don't beat yourself up over it, but just get ready for the February exam. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really interesting because every jurisdiction so far that's released their results has had a significant increase in their pass score. So people who did the in-person July exams, and then we've seen some of the earlier September in-person exams have come through, and there are many 10-point jumps in their pass rates. So I'm trying to be the optimist and hope that Florida is not this crazy outlier, but it's a very odd, and I know you and I talked about it in our discussion online about, and in the podcast about Florida, very odd choice from the examiners to take a year where clearly every other jurisdiction is recognizing how stressful and unfair these circumstances are that are so far beyond the applicant's control, and how difficult people are dealing with so many health concerns and emotional concerns and mental health concerns. And then to add on top of that, let's throw in a completely new subject for the multiple choice that we've never tested before in multiple choice. And not just one or two questions, but many questions on the subject that no one was anticipating. It's very odd choices. I like to think that they wouldn't then penalize students for that, but gosh, I don't know.
Yeah, we said last week it was mean-spirited. In talking to students, the sense that I got, particularly around the trust questions, is they weren't even mainstream trust questions. They were really odd, sort of gotcha questions, asking about the fringes of the topic. And to me, that's just an attempt to really stick it to people. And it feels like a nasty law school professor who's just decided to drop a unpleasant exam on their class at the end of the semester to see if anybody was paying attention or in class. And it may very well be that what Florida did is they took some law professor's exam and just took it and put it in. But it is not the things that lawyers practicing trust law would deal with. I think very few Florida lawyers deal with cypre in trust law, and yet there were multiple questions on that subject. So, and I'll just wrap up by saying this. We are in the process of drafting Florida multiple choice questions. It is not fun, but we are working on it, and we will get those out as quickly as we can. And we will endeavor to prepare students as best we can for this unexpected event. So that's Florida. You can't game the system, and I think that's where I would leave it. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, so that's part of why I ended with this one, is I think it's a good summation of a lot of what we've been talking about today, which is there's all this external chaos going on, and we're not sure. There has been for, 7-8 months now. And we're not sure necessarily how's Florida. Are they going to use the NCBE questions this time, or are they going to stick with just the Florida multiple choice? Are they going to put trust in the Florida multiple choice again or not? What's California going to do? Is it going to end up being a longer test? Are they going to have a 9-hour day, or will they split off? There's all these unknowns right now. And so what I think you're going to just get used to it, because what Jackson and I are going to tell you over and over again is that you need to separate yourself from it, and you need to focus on what we're telling you to do. I promise we are going to do the best that we can to help you through this insane season, and we're going to do the best we can to help you pass the bar exam. Your job is in part to pay attention to what we're saying and to not panic and to not freak out and go back to the things that didn't work for you in the past, okay? So I think that's like the overall message right now for this week is there's a lot up in the air. There's a lot of uncertainty. We are on your team. We are here to help you. There's a team of people who you don't even know who are behind the scenes, who have been in your shoes. Everyone who's doing any writing, any editing, any teaching, anything. Not only are we members of a bar, we use Celebration Bar Review to pass that bar exam. And so we completely understand where you are in this process and how difficult it is, and we're on your side. And so you've got to just calm down and trust that we know what we're talking about, and we want to help you. We're not trying to trick you. I promise we're not trying to trick you, and we're not keeping some secret away from you that we don't want you to know about how you really can pass the exam. Like, we are as honest and upfront with you about everything that we can tell you that we think is helpful for you. So
yeah, and I think it's a good place to sort of say to people as we wrap up, there's a lot of noise out there. There's so much being written and said about the bar exam, about diploma waiver, diploma privilege, about scoring, about how the tests are going to be given, all of those things. And they're all impactful for sure, but ultimately not a lot of them are within your control. And because you can't control them, don't spend energy on them. Spend your energy on the things you can control. Pay attention to the direction that you're being given, follow that, and that's your best path, I think, to success. And we'll continue to watch what's going on and keep you informed. We took some criticism this week from somebody that said we were trying to sweep diploma privilege under the rug. No, we're not. Our students aren't going to be eligible for diploma privilege. And so we want to talk about what's relevant, which is how to pass the bar. But there's a lot of that conversation out there. And if you get distracted by it, it ultimately is going to be not beneficial, I think, for most of you. And so I really do hope everybody keeps their focus. We just want all of you, particularly in these next couple of weeks, when we know there's going to be not only noise about the bar exam, but just noise generally, that you try and keep your focus and your presence in what you're doing. You are trying to do something really important in your life. Keep the focus there, keep working on that, and don't take your eye off that ball. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks everybody. We're glad you could be with us today. Hope everyone is staying healthy and safe. Again, congratulations to everyone that finished the exams in October. And now we, weirdly enough, turn our sights into February of 2021. And we will be back again soon and talk to you about what's going on then. And until then, take care, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.